Well, the provincial government and SaskPower are at odds with the federal government about what is possible when it comes to clean energy. Premier Scott Moe says the province cannot meet the potential requirements set out through the federal government's clean electricity regulations, formerly known as Clean Electricity Standard. The federal government says electricity emissions should be net zero by 2035, with conventional coal phased out 5 years before that. The provincial government and SaskPower say 2050 is a more realistic target. Well, today on Blue Sky, we're going to hear from the president of SaskPower, we'll hear from the federal environment minister, and we'll hear from a couple of people who study green energy. But of course, we want to hear from you. What's at stake as Saskatchewan does not meet the 2035 clean energy targets set out by the federal government? Would you pay more to overhaul the current power system? Now, Saskatoon Morning host Theresa Kleem spoke with Canada's Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault on Tuesday morning. She asked him to respond to Premier Scott Moe's claim that 2035 is an unrealistic goal for the province to hit that net zero electricity emissions target.
Well, it is interesting that the Premier would say it can't be done since he hasn't even seen what the regulations will entail and what kind of flexibility mechanisms they will be in terms of the use of natural gas and provisions for peaking demand. We are very mindful at the federal level of the necessity to have a grid that is reliable, that is affordable as well for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. But we are also, as a federal government, very mindful of the impacts of climate change. And we are seeing it right now in Alberta, and now I hear parts of Saskatchewan are being hit by forest fires, as well as British Columbia. We've seen floodings in eastern Canada. The last estimate from the Parliamentary Budget Officer for 2021 puts the cost to Canadians of climate change at $20 billion. That's for the year 2020 alone. So we need to be obviously mindful of affordability and reliability for the grid, but we also, all of us, have to play our part when it comes to fighting climate change.
And you mentioned natural gas. Now Saskatchewan relies heavily on natural gas and coal for its electrical grid. So how realistic is it for the province to get us off natural gas and coal and still have reliable electrical power within the next 12 years?
Well, it's interesting. When we look at what's been happening in Canada as a whole, and we go back in the past, we see that in the last 20 years or so, we've basically doubled the size of Canada's grid. While we did that, we cut the emissions, so the climate pollution, in half. So it's something we've done before collectively. We didn't do it necessarily for climate change reasons, but we've done it. We've massively increased the size of our grid in Canada while cutting greenhouse gas pollution in half. Basically, we have to do a bit more of the same in the coming 12 years. The proposed regulations will be out soon, so we're still working with officials to finalize those. But I'm hopeful that by the summer, the draft regulations for comments will be published. So they won't be final. We will be talking with provinces and territories and utilities, whether they're private utilities like SaskPower or private utilities, independent system operators, which is something we've done already. We've had more than 1,000 meetings in the last few months with all sorts of actors in the electricity sector. And I should also say, Theresa, that just last week, the United States of America published their draft regulations on what they're calling power plants, which is essentially the same. And it looks like we're very much aligned with our friends and allies in the U.S. on this. So the reality, it's not just us in Canada trying to do that, not just us and the Americans. It's the Europeans, it's the Japanese, it's in Australia, it's in all over the world. People are looking, and especially investors are looking for a place to put their money where the grid is cleaner and cleaner. Why? Because their customers, whether they're doing cars, whether they're doing computers or telephones or other everyday life products, their customers are asking for cleaner products. In fact, we have car manufacturers that are committing to produce net zero cars by 2035, which means that the production of the vehicle will be carbon neutral in the next 12 years. So if we don't do that, it is business opportunities we will lose in Canada, and it is the economy of the 21st century we will be missing out, and jobs for Canadians and people in Saskatchewan for generations to come.
I guess it goes back to the question, is it realistic for Saskatchewan to be there in 2035? Mo says closing natural gas plants would leave people in the dark, cause utility bills to spike. I read you saying that those comments are baseless and untrue. Why do you say that? Why are you so confident that this is possible in Saskatchewan?
Well, to think for 1 second, let's be honest here, to think that for 1 second a federal government would force something upon one of the jurisdictions which would make the lights go off is, how it's totally unrealistic. Of course, we want to reduce the pollution of our electricity grids. And in fact, there are many studies out there that show that investing in a net zero grid will help people reduce their electricity bill. And the federal government is helping provinces and territories do that by making historic investment in the electricity sector. More than $40 billion was announced in the last federal budget, specifically to work with provinces and territories so that we can take on part of the cost of doing this on us as a federal government and not pass those costs on to consumers, whether they're in Saskatchewan or Quebec or Ontario or anywhere else in the country.
Before we talk more about money flowing towards greening the grid, I would like to hear your response to people working in the coal or natural gas industry and who are worried about their jobs here in Saskatchewan in the future.
Well, we adopted a legislation to phase out coal produced electricity by 2030, even before I was in politics. This has been in the works for a long time. Coal is one of the most polluting way, both for local communities and in terms of climate change, of producing electricity. We now have renewable energies that are cheaper. In fact, almost everywhere in the world, renewable energies are cheaper now. So when you talk to cost to consumers, much cheaper than to produce electricity using wind and solar than it is using coal. And what we're doing is we're working with coal workers and coal communities or communities that are dependent on coal to build with them what will the transition look like. How will we help them go from that sector to new sectors? If you look at where we're seeing the most jobs in the clean tech sector being and the renewable energy sector being produced right now or created, it's not in Quebec or Ontario. It's in Alberta. So there is something there for prairie provinces, and Saskatchewan can have its fair share of this new economy if they want to. And it's important for the province to sit down with us and find those solutions. But the idea that we can continue using coal while polluting the air we breathe, the water we drink, while we have cheaper, cleaner, more affordable alternatives, why wouldn't we do it?
Scott Mo says SaskPower is prepared to meet net zero emissions by 2050. Why is that timeline not fast enough? Like, why 2035?
Well, because we need to act faster to fight climate change. How much worse does climate change need to get for Premier Mo to take it seriously? How many forest fires? We already have, at the beginning of May, double the forest fires we had last year. And summer isn't even there. What about the impacts to our farmers? Because how bad does it have to get before Premier Mo understands that we can build a strong economy and good jobs for Canadians while fighting pollution?
How important, looking at the whole picture, all of Canada, how important is Saskatchewan overall in the big picture to reach Canada's climate goals?
Well, everyone must do its fair share. So we're not asking the people of Saskatchewan or the province or SaskPower to do more than its fair share. We're asking everyone and every sector of our economy and every corner of our society in Canada to do both fighting climate change, reducing pollution, helping our kids and grandkids have access to cleaner air and cleaner water while we're building a stronger Canadian economy.
So what would happen if Saskatchewan decided to not go along with the incoming federal emission policy and the clean electricity standards?
I don't think that's going to be the case, despite the rhetoric that we're hearing from some. Second, I think it would be extremely harmful for the people of Saskatchewan. I think the people of Saskatchewan want those good investments that we are seeing happening in many parts of the country right now and around the world in the economy of the 21st century. I think that people would want to see the future of their kids and grandkids secured by those massive investments that we are seeing in what will be, it's a very competitive economy out there, and people are competing to attract those good investments from companies like Volkswagen or Stellantis, or companies in the renewable energy sector or the clean tech sector. And Saskatchewan can certainly have its fair share of that and ensure that you have a strong economy for generations to come.
And that's Canada's Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault speaking with the CBC's Teresa Clean. We're going to hear a response from Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe coming right up, but of course we want to hear from you today. We'll start taking your calls in a few minutes. What do you think of what you have heard so far? And what do you think of the province's position that it cannot possibly green the energy grid before 2050? Now, on Tuesday, just hours after the federal environment minister was on Saskatoon Morning, the province held a news conference where we heard from SaskPower and the provincial government. We're going to hear from the SaskPower CEO, Rupin Pandya, later in the show. But right now, here's a response from Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe.
What we're saying today, that as per the Constitution, how we generate power in the province of Saskatchewan, or any province across Canada for that matter, is the purview and the jurisdiction of the province. Those are decisions that ultimately the province makes, not the federal government. And those are decisions that we will work on in, for example, our coal-fired plants, as to whether they would continue to utilize coal in a post-2030 world, or whether we would look at converting those to gas in a post-2030 world. That's a decision that has not yet been made, but it is the purview of the province as to whether or not SaskPower would have that opportunity to do either of those, and we're saying that we do have the opportunity to do either of those. Listen, the clean electricity standards are based in three principles. One is the greening of the grid, or the reduction of emissions, and the federal government has interpreted that as a net zero by 2035 target, which is not achievable. Even if we took all of the financial challenges off the table, of which we can't, still not achievable in this province and a number of other provinces. And so we agree with the greening of the grid, the reduction of emissions. In fact, our target is net zero by 2050, so not that much different. We believe that the federal government can make a substantial contribution to affordable, reliable power that reduces emissions in this province by, first, recognizing Saskatchewan's plan to achieve net zero by the year 2050. Second, by contributing to the cost of and emissions reduction in Saskatchewan's plan by providing SaskPower with grants for 75% of the cost of the first small modular reactor that will be built in Saskatchewan, 50% of the cost of new renewable and low emission power sources that are being utilized in Saskatchewan. And under the Saskatchewan plan, the federal government would contribute then about $6 billion. The Saskatchewan people would be responsible for the remaining $28 billion. With that federal contribution, the Saskatchewan plan can hold annual rate increases to about 3%. Which is in stark contrast, I would say, to the unaffordable plan by the federal government, which results in a total rate increase of 107% by the year 2035. The federal government can also increase affordability for SaskPower customers, thereby Saskatchewan residents, by freezing its carbon tax on electricity in Saskatchewan at its current rate of $65 per tonne, rather than increasing it to $170 per tonne or even beyond. This step alone would save SaskPower customers billions of dollars over the course of the next number of years. Finally, the Saskatchewan plan also means that we will consider running our fossil fuel generated electricity production and facilities to the end of their life. but it's a consideration that we will continue to evaluate as part of our commitment to keep electricity rates affordable and to protect the reliability of the Saskatchewan electricity grid.
That was Premier Scott Moe speaking to reporters on Tuesday. Now, we've heard from Premier Moe, who says it's impossible to get Saskatchewan's electrical grid to net zero by 2035, the target set by the federal government. But is this just Moe playing politics? Is it possible to get our electricity solely from renewables like wind and hydro? What do you think? Now, to discuss this for the rest of the program today, I'm joined by two guests. David Maenz is a doctor of biochemistry at the University of Saskatchewan and author of the book, The Price of Carbon. And David is in the Saskatoon studio with me. Thanks for coming in, David.
Well, thank you for having me, Garth.
And Margot Hurlbert is the Canada Research Chair in Climate Change, Energy and Sustainability Policy, a professor at the Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Regina, and she is in our Regina studio. Margot, thanks so much for coming in.
Great to be here, Garth.
Okay, we just heard from both the Federal Environment Minister and the Premier of Saskatchewan. Margot, I'll start with you. What stood out for you?
Yeah, really interesting segue from the Saskatchewan First, the assertion of the Saskatchewan jurisdiction on power production, to conciliatory attitude looking to Ottawa for contribution to this incredible cost. So I think there's some positive things that we can see from this. From my perspective, I think acknowledging that we need to get to net zero is a very laudable, and Premier Moe should be congratulated on stating that as part of the strategy. And now I think we move the discussion to when to achieve net zero by, and can we do it by 2035, and what's involved. I think that we've been dragging our feet, and now is the time for that discussion of how do we imagine net zero, when can we do it? And I agree with the federal minister that 2050 is late for power production, that if we're going to address climate change, we have to have all sectors net zero by 2050. And power production is the low-hanging fruit where we start, and we have to convert vehicles to electricity, which means we have to increase the amount of electricity we have. So by no means an easy task.
And David, what are your thoughts on what we've heard so far?
Well, if you step back from this and look what the current plan is for SaskPower, they're assuming that the status of having a relatively isolated grid with not that much access to zero-emission hydropower and just a little bit of power coming in from Manitoba will just continue on. And this assumption is it's just been turned on its head with the recent announcement from the federal government that they're committed toward greening the electricity generation right across the country by 2035. In the latest budget, up to $80 billion is anticipated to be spent on green infrastructure with a focus on clean electricity. And specifically, this money will go toward building interprovincial transmission corridors. So these are high voltage direct transmission lines between BC and Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And in addition, funding will go toward modernizing electricity grids and building energy storage, along with replacing fossil fuel infrastructure with zero emission options. So this is a game changer for Saskatchewan. When those transmission corridors are in place, then we now have access to large volume hydro, especially from Manitoba. And this basically unlocks the immense potential for renewables in southern Saskatchewan. And if you look at the models that have been constructed around this, basically you would blanket the southern Saskatchewan with wind farms and overbuild capacity for renewables. And then this clean electricity can actually be exported primarily to Alberta. And one of the contentions happens is, well, what do you do about base load electricity? Well, you've overbuilt wind power, and now you've got access to Manitoba Hydro, and also nobody's saying, the federal government is not saying you'd never run the gas plants again. The gas plants can function as peaker plants, and along with Manitoba Hydro, this balances this immense capacity for renewables in southern Saskatchewan, and it all works.
Does Manitoba have the capacity?
Yeah, that's the question that comes up, and it's not that we're replacing fossil fuel with Manitoba Hydro as baseload emissions. What happens here is that Manitoba Hydro is used just as a balancing factor here, and you're not going to demand from Manitoba more capacity and delivery of electricity than it can provide.
Okay, I want to go to some callers, and I'm going to take a quick news break and continue. Elmer in Regina has been waiting patiently. Hi, Elmer.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'd like to see more renewable power coming from like home-based solar powered, and kind of reduce the risk of, as your guest has stated, overbuilding the system and being too dependent on government to provide, the government to provide all the energy production. So that's what I would think. And also, there's other alternatives rather than natural gas. Of course, you can run those turbines on methane or something of that nature, because that's another very potent greenhouse gas. Mm-hmm. And that's all.
Thanks, Elmer.
I'm concerned about it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for the call, Elmer. Let's hear from Harold in Saskatoon. Hi, Harold.
Yeah, hi, Garth. Yeah, I think it's kind of ridiculous for the Saskatchewan government to just rule out completely that we can reach net zero for power production by 2035 if they haven't even seen the clean energy regulations, clean electricity regulations, which are due out a little bit later this year. So I have to suspect it's just politically motivated. We're in a climate emergency. In case there's anyone who hasn't looked out the window or turned on the news lately, the best time to do things like this would have been 30 years ago, but the second best time is right now, not 30 years from now. That's all I got to say.
Thanks, Harold. And we're talking about Saskatchewan's position that it can't possibly meet the 2035 target for green energy or zero-emission energy, and the federal government's insistence that 2035 is the deadline. So first off, what do you think of what you've heard so far from the federal Environment Minister and Premier Scott Moe? And what do you think? Is it realistic that Saskatchewan could go green in electricity generation by 2035? Do you agree with the Premier and the Saskatchewan government that it's going to take till 2050? Or perhaps this is just more politics? What do you think? Margot, David, before we go too much further, I want to play something for you both and then get your thoughts. On Tuesday at the Provincial News Conference, reporters also heard from the SaskPower president and CEO, Rupen Pandya. He spoke about why he thinks Saskatchewan cannot meet those 2035 targets. Let's hear it.
We're here to talk to you about the potential federal regulations that will have a major impact on electricity in Saskatchewan. The federal government's proposed clean electricity regulations will see Canada's electricity sector legally required to achieve net zero GHG emissions by 2035. Prior to the proposed federal clean electricity regulations, SaskPower was working towards achieving the goal by 2050. This target was outlined in the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, which was tabled in November of 2020 and was already a very aggressive timeline. The proposed clean electricity regulations moved that timeline up by 15 years, from 2050 to 2035. This timeline is not feasible in Saskatchewan or likely in several other Canadian jurisdictions. SaskPower's mission is to provide reliable, sustainable, cost-effective power to the people of the province. As I mentioned, SaskPower is committed to the goal of achieving a net zero GHG electricity system. The challenge that we have is that logistically, financially, and technologically, the implications of transitioning our fossil fuel-based electricity generation system to net zero are unprecedented. Saskatchewan is one of the few provinces that does not have access to the needed commercially available technical solutions to achieve net zero GHG emissions by 2035. And unlike provinces rich in hydropower like Manitoba, British Columbia, and Quebec, we don't have the geographic benefit of being able to develop zero GHG emitting large-scale baseload hydro production. Logistically, even if the necessary non-emitting baseload technologies did exist and were commercially proven, it's not feasible for us to acquire the capital, material, and labor needed to transition over 150% of our generation system that took us 93 years to build in a short 12 years. Even if we introduce our first SMR, small modular reactor, by 2035, achieving net zero electricity system by 2035 in Saskatchewan is not possible. And beyond the challenges of having to rebuild over 150% of our generating capacity, the transition to net zero will require us to have a significant build out of new transmission lines, as well as modernizing our electricity grid, while at the same time sustaining the current power grid in the province of Saskatchewan. So the current capacity of SaskPower system is about 5,437 megawatts, which is comprised of about 65% thermal fossil fuel emitting generation and about 35% non-emitting sources. Renewable generation such as wind and solar doesn't produce electricity when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. And given the intermittency of renewables, about 80% of the energy consumed in Saskatchewan must come from reliable baseload sources that can provide power 24/7. And we are amongst Canadian jurisdictions, we have the longest path to travel with respect to decarbonizing electricity. We also have one of the largest grids per capita in North America. We have 157,000 kilometers of distribution and transmission lines that cover 652,000 square kilometers. We have 550,000 customers, and that gives us some of the lowest densities with respect to our customers per line kilometer. We have about 2.6 customers per kilometer of line. And what that means is that there are relatively few customers to bear the large cost of transitioning and maintaining our power system. Given the size of the province and what is one of the largest grids in North America, per capita electricity transition costs will have a much larger impact on Saskatchewan ratepayers than anywhere else in Canada. We already face electricity rate competitiveness challenges with low-cost non-emitting hydro jurisdictions, and this gap will only grow. Saskatchewan's population and economy are growing, and on the road to 2035, SaskPower will need to expand our electricity generating capacity by more than 7,000 megawatts. We'll build out the electricity grid and plan additional, and this will support building out additional economic growth and electrification of transportation and industrial processes, including heating. This expansion will have significant costs that will increase electricity rates for customers no matter how quickly we decarbonize the power system. And ensuring affordable and reliable electricity will be foundational for Saskatchewan to achieve long-term success, jobs, investment, and exports, including population growth. The requirement for net zero GHG electricity system by 2035 is not possible due to technological, logistical, and financial challenges, as I noted earlier. Our fundamental concern is that the CER, the Clean Electricity Regulations, are being drafted and implemented without fully considering the unique context and associated impacts of these regulations on each province. We have shared these challenges with senior officials in the federal government to help them understand Saskatchewan's unique situation. The role of natural gas generation beyond 2034 is necessary to ensure reliable power to back up intermittent renewables and transition to net zero electricity system. Natural gas generation will be required beyond 2034, and without access to natural gas generation to back up wind and solar to meet customer electricity demand, SaskPower will be unable to meet Saskatchewan's electricity needs in 2035. In fact, Ontario's electricity system operator has communicated that significant natural gas generation will remain in their system beyond 2034. They've just announced that they are building 8 new gas plants. The federal government has communicated to SaskPower that non-emitting hydro imported from Manitoba would allow SaskPower to achieve net zero by 2035. This is not accurate. Manitoba does not have surplus power to meet Saskatchewan's needs to reach net zero by 2035. Manitoba's grid is roughly comparable to ours. They have about 6,000 megawatts of capacity. Their load is about 5,000 megawatts, leaving about 1,000 megawatts remaining About 290 of that is already being imported by SaskPower into the province of Saskatchewan, and then they have reserve margin requirements, which would leave them with insufficient power to respond to our capacity needs during the peak load times during the winter and summer months. Beyond the technological and logistical impacts, the financial impact of achieving net zero electricity grid in Saskatchewan will significantly broaden the existing regional electricity rate gap between hydrogeneration-rich and non-hydrogeneration-rich provinces within our country. Even if we could technically achieve net zero by 2035, the cost would more than double the rate of power. Saskatchewan has been planning for a net zero GHG electricity system by 2050 and has already taken steps to decarbonize the electricity system. This includes adding almost 700 megawatts of capacity from sources such as wind, solar, and biomass. Meanwhile, we have plans to add another 600 megawatts of wind and another 400 megawatts of solar by 2027. As we look to further expand wind and solar generation, we'll continue to need natural gas generation to provide backup when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And as an example, SaskPower currently has 617 megawatts of wind generation, and on the hottest or coldest days of the year when demand for electricity is at its highest, there's often very little wind for days at a time with minimal electricity provided for wind generation. We had a period in December where there was no wind between Alberta and Saskatchewan, so across both prairie provinces for 7 days in a row. So as a result, natural gas generation is necessary to ensure reliability as we add renewables. Additionally, SaskPower continues to evaluate nuclear small modular reactors as a potential non-emitting baseload source of electricity that could be available as early as 2034. I'd like to stress that SaskPower's mission is to provide reliable, sustainable, cost-effective power to our province, and we will continue to do so. Looking ahead, we will require federal regulatory flexibility to ensure that we can continue to meet the electricity needs of our province. This includes more time to reach the net zero GHG target and significant funding necessary to ensure SaskPower can provide our customers and our province with sustainable electricity into the future.
And that was SaskPower President and CEO Rupan Pandya speaking at a news conference on Tuesday. Okay, he gives a lot of reasons why Saskatchewan can't make that 2035 target set by the federal government. Margot, what do you think of what he said?
Yeah, that was a lot of detail, and I know most of it, and all of it, to my knowledge, to be true, but it is a SaskPower perspective, and what isn't of note is the broader socioeconomic system. So I kind of have four, I'll make it very short, points. First of all, it's not acknowledging the litigation risks. So the obligation of our governments and our decision makers to make decisions about climate change. And we're starting to see litigation from young people about having made decisions that are infringing on their rights to live in a clean, safe environment into the future. So those types of costs are not figured in. Also, the costs of climate change damages, the costs of wildfires, the costs of flooding, of drought. And these damages that are being incurred with the wildfires we have right now, the relocation, the damages to people's homes and their possessions are not inconsequential in both damages financially and mental health. The Institute for Sustainable Finance has estimated 2.7 to 5.5 trillion, depending on how much climate change we experience over the next few decades. So those costs are not being calculated in. Third point, output-based performance standards of Saskatchewan were recognized by the federal government in the fall of last year so that we didn't have to follow and pay to the federal government the industrial climate pricing. So Saskatchewan benefited from that decision. And where are those funds going? How do we figure that benefit of revenues that we have received into the equation of paying for this cost of transition? Saskatchewan led with Boundary Dam being converted to carbon capture and sequestration, and that was way back in 2016. So this is my fourth point, is where is the Saskatchewan innovation and transition opportunities? So the Canadian Climate Institute published a report and ranking provinces that were getting into seeing the opportunity of clean growth and companies. And Saskatchewan has some. We have geothermal. We have companies that are going to benefit from this transition, and we need to think about this a bit more holistically with what we can do. And we know that Indigenous groups are getting into clean energy in a big way in Saskatchewan. And so there's opportunities for businesses and Indigenous peoples here in Saskatchewan to benefit from some of the transition accelerator, the opportunities for receiving tax refunds and benefiting into the future with supporting this. So we're really not hearing much about the place of this innovation, and whether it's small modular reactors or carbon capture sequestration. So I think we need to think about this a bit more broadly.
Okay, David, what do you think of what we heard from SaskPower?
Just one issue in particular that I find a bit disingenuous here. There's an implication that the gas plants will have to be turned off completely in 2035. The federal government has never said that. The high-level guidance that they provided for the upcoming clean energy electricity regulations actually states that existing gas plants can continue to operate post-2034 on a need basis. So when you hear statements like, oh, there were 7 days of no wind right across Alberta and Saskatchewan, that's when the existing gas plants would come online and maintain power flowing to the province and the reliability of the grid. And in terms of some of these issues of cost, quickly, the Canadian Energy Regulator has modeled what a net zero grid would look like for Saskatchewan, and this change can happen very quickly. They're actually talking about 2030. 60% of the electricity would be generated by wind in Saskatchewan, and another 20% by solar, and natural gas would be turned down to about 20% supply of electricity. This assumes, again, these transmission infrastructure is in place between the provinces, and you've got the backup available from natural gas plants. And if you look at what happens to emissions, it's cut by 87% under that scenario. And you're in line for getting to net zero by 2035 very effectively.
Okay, I want to take some callers. Let's start with Ellen in Regina. Hi, Ellen.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead, Ellen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. I just want to say I've been since the 1980s. I've ridden my bike, I've walked, and I've taken the bus. I've never owned a car. And if people have to make small sacrifices together to fight climate change. Mr. Moe is arrogant in his approach to the proposals from the federal government. Brad Wall was as well. They're both very short-sighted. We've been fighting, Saskatchewan Environmental Group has been fighting climate change for the last 50 years. And we've seen the future coming. 40 years ago, we saw the future coming of climate change. Now we're in a crisis. The federal government is offering us solutions. They're sending Regina 10 electric buses in their program. And, I mean, that's a start. And I just think it's time for a new government, because if they're not hearing us, maybe a new government will. And that's all I have to say. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you for calling, Ellen. Just a quick note, though, that when this came to a vote in the legislature, the NDP official opposition supported it, also thinking the federal government is moving too fast with its clean electrical standards. That said, let's move on to Greg in Saskatoon. Hi, Greg.
Hello.
Hi, Greg. Go ahead.
Yes, I would just like to add this to the conversation. I recently read a small book called Numbers Don't Lie, and it talks about multitude of global issues. And in regards to global oil consumption, 25% is used to produce electricity. The elephants in the room are in global shipping, air traffic, semi-transports, cement production, ammonia, and plastics consume 75%. So we're very, very fixated on reducing the amount of oil that's devoted to producing electricity, and yet, as I said, the elephants in the room, we're a long way. So I'd just like your guests if they could add anything or their comments on my comments.
Sure, Greg. David, it's Greg's concerns are sort of in that constituency of thought that we're a small province in the greater scheme of things. The natural gas and coal we burn to generate electricity is, in the global scheme of things, fairly minimal. What do you think of Greg's concerns?
Well, first off, 70% of global emissions come from the combination of Canada and the large number of countries with actually comparable or less emissions than Canada. The responsibility is global. You can't, and that goes right down to the provincial level. You can't just say that our contribution here is insignificant. Who cares? Because when you add it all up, everyone has to, and every level of government has to come forward and cut emissions. As for priorities, electricity is the highest priority. The reason is that the model toward getting to net zero by 2050, economy-wise, requires clean electricity early on, and then that clean electricity is used for powering the transition of electrification of transportation, buildings, etc. And clean electricity technically can be done, and it's just a matter of political will to execute.
Margot, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely agree. Power production is the low-hanging fruit, and it's necessary to start with this if we're going to see the opportunities that exist in clean cement, hydrogen, all of the lithium batteries and the components of the new clean future that we need. We need to do power production first in order to see all those benefits and not be akin to the developing countries that can't afford to do this. And we're existing in a place of intellectual poverty by not even imagining what that net zero in the future of all sectors might look like and the opportunities that it gives rise to.
Okay, I'm going to try to squeeze in one more caller before we have to go. Ted is in Saskatoon. Hi, Ted.
Hi, Garth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Ted, go ahead.
Hello? Yeah, sure. You asked at the beginning of this segment, is it politics? To me, that's the elephant in the room in all of this. Saskatchewan has the loosest, most Wild West political contribution rules and laws in the country, and it's pretty obvious from the get-go this government has not been on side in terms of being creative moving forward, in terms of mitigating climate change, looking for alternate solutions. It was the get-go willing to put money into carbon sequestration, which means coal plants can run longer. Now it's making lots of noise about small modular reactors. Of course, former Premier Wall sits on the board of a company dealing with that. Just on a personal note, I have 24 solar panels installed in my roof in Saskatoon last year. Thank goodness the city is on the 1-to-1 ratio, still net zero. And I bought a PHEV, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. It's only a 50K range in the city, and I can charge her up with my solar panels. Everybody has to be part of the solution. So when you say we don't admit as much as China, well, it's each individual and their contribution to this and how government can help them move along to get off this carbon treadmill we're on, which I think will result in our children and grandchildren inheriting a lesser place to live.
Ted, because I have you on the line, and I'm just curious, you have a plug-in hybrid. Do you have to pay that $150 surcharge?
No, I don't.
Okay, that's just for fully electric.
It means I can run on gasoline and I can it's a hybrid, and I plug it in overnight just on my household current. I get a 50K range, so it's great for driving around the city from basically Easter time until October, till Thanksgiving. I don't have to fill up with gas.
Okay.
And it costs as much as another car would. So.
Okay. Just a note here, we're going to do a whole other show about solar because there's so much to dig into there. I want to share this email from Jim, who takes a different perspective. Jim writes, SaskPower has a lot of expertise in energy generation and distribution. I expect they have studied the matter thoroughly and know what they're talking about. If better and cheaper options were possible, feasible, or practical, I'm pretty sure SaskPower would jump on the chance to build them. They've indicated they can't make the transmission by 2035. I believe them more than armchair quarterbacks on the matter. That comes to us from Jim. Okay, Dave, Margot, this time goes by so fast. Margot, I'll start with you. What does Saskatchewan, what are the, we've heard so much about the costs of trying to meet the 2035 deadline. What are the potential costs of not meeting that deadline?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind, because we're focusing on our power bills going up and that cost without focusing on that climate change damage figure of what wildfires and what droughts and floods and the risk of extreme weather is to us. And it's kind of climate mitigation, or the reduction of greenhouse gases, is so important, and it's so important to do it quickly because if we don't do it immediately, like yesterday, our risks of having fires and drought and floods more intense and of more duration increases from twofold to fourfold, depending on how much we fail to reduce emissions by. And with that, the costs of responding to those climate impacts and extreme weather events also increase. So the more we're able to do now with mitigation or reducing the greenhouse gases that we're emitting saves us so much money in the future that it pays for itself. So this type of thinking it's completely not being considered. And I think we need to think of it that way, that every dollar we're spending, I've seen studies that say every dollar ranks or saves us $4 in those damages into the future and upwards. So instead of just focusing on, I think it was 107% increase in our power production rates, that's probably saving us 500% in damages that we'll have to incur into the future for these climate impacts.
David, I've only got 30 seconds, but I'll give you the last word. What are the costs of not making 2035?
Immense. The cost of climate damage dwarfs the cost of taking action, and that's a simple reality of it. And I'd also like to quickly throw in, we're not in this alone. The federal government is going to be a major player in supplying funds for SaskPower to decarbonize.
All right. David, Margot, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.